Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. I was 24 when it happened. I had just graduated with a degree in marketing and landed what I thought was my dream job at a mid-sized firm in Charlotte. It wasn't huge, but it had a modern office, a casual atmosphere, and most importantly, potential. I didn't know anyone in town, so when Emily, a girl who started the same week I did, offered to split her 2-bedroom apartment, I was beyond relieved. She was cheerful, easy to talk to, and knew the area well. At the time, I thought I'd lucked out. We joked about becoming the dynamic duo of the department. The first few weeks went by without a hitch. We carpooled, worked on a couple of small campaigns together, and even had a wine and pizza ritual every Friday. Emily always had some story about the office drama, who was sucking up to the manager, who was secretly dating who. But I mostly tuned it out. I was focused on proving myself. I wanted to stand out for my work, not the gossip. She laughed it off, saying I was too clean for marketing, and that I needed to be a little more cutthroat. I thought she was joking. It started with something small. I showed up late to a client call one morning because the calendar invite was missing. I was sure I had it saved. Emily acted confused, then shrugged and said, "Maybe it glitched. That app crashes on me all the time." I believed her. But then 2 days later, I opened a document I'd prepared for a pitch, and half the notes were gone. I panicked, rewrote everything from memory and delivered it, only to realize mid-meeting that the numbers were off. Again, she looked surprised. "Didn't you say you triple-checked those?" I felt stupid. The real shift happened the night before a major presentation. I had spent 3 evenings refining my slides, rehearsing my points, and even timed out the transitions. When I went to open the file that morning, it looked like someone had gone in and rearranged things. Not just once, but several slides were switched, bullet points reworded in weird, slightly sarcastic ways, and charts wrong. Totally wrong. I froze. Emily walked past, sipping her coffee, glanced at my screen and said, "Oh, you're still tweaking it? Bold move considering it's at 10. There was this smirk on her face that didn't quite reach her eyes. That morning, I barely held it together during the presentation. I fumbled through the reordered slides trying to salvage what I could while my manager, Lisa, gave me this disappointed frown that made my stomach twist. Emily was sitting right there, front row, nodding along like she was watching a TED Talk. I remember seeing her jot something down in her notebook. Casual, calm, not a trace of concern on her face. Afterward, she told me not to worry, that everyone messes up sometimes and that Lisa was actually impressed with how I recovered. I wanted to believe her. I needed to. But the more I tried to write it off, the more it happened. Emails I'd swear I sent would vanish from my sent folder. Meeting reminders disappeared off my phone. One time I printed out the wrong campaign mock-up, something I knew I hadn't saved. It was like my work was being quietly sabotaged in little ways I couldn't prove. Meanwhile, Emily was thriving. She started getting compliments in meetings, being asked to help with projects I was already leading. She always made sure to do it with a smile, like she was doing me a favor. I started feeling like I was losing my grip. I even booked an appointment with IT, convinced my email was bugged or my calendar was syncing weird. The guy checked everything. No issues, no trace of edits, no signs of hacking, nothing. I remember sitting on my bed that night staring at the ceiling and thinking, am I going crazy? Emily came home late, tossed her bag on the couch and asked if I wanted Thai food. She was acting normal, too normal, and that scared me more than anything else. The worst part? I couldn't talk to anyone. Who was I supposed to tell? "Hi, I think my roommate is secretly sabotaging my career." It sounded paranoid, even to me. I started second-guessing everything. I left post-its on my laptop, took screenshots of my calendar. I even started locking my bedroom door at night, though I never said why. Emily noticed, of course. One morning she laughed and said, "You locking me out now? Should I be worried?" She was joking, but not really. Her smile was too wide, her eyes too flat. Everything came to a head on a Wednesday morning that I'll never forget. I had woken up earlier than usual, around 5:30 a.m. I couldn't sleep. My chest felt tight, like I was bracing for something. I went to make coffee and passed by Emily's door, which was slightly open. I glanced in, just a reflex, I swear, and that's when I saw her screen glowing in the dark. She had my calendar open, not hers, mine. She was typing something quickly. I didn't move, just stood there, barely breathing. Then she turned, and I swear to God, she smiled. Just a flash, like she'd caught me watching and didn't care. I backed away and pretended I hadn't seen anything. My hands were shaking so bad I spilled half the coffee before I even got it into the mug. That same day, I submitted a PTO request and lied that I had a family emergency back home. I packed what I could into my car while she was still at work and left before 5 p.m. I didn't even leave a note, just vanished. And as I was pulling out of the driveway, I looked in the rearview mirror and saw her standing by the window, just watching me. No expression, no wave, just still. I stayed with a friend in Raleigh for 2 weeks while I looked for a sublet. I filed a quiet request to transfer departments at work, and thankfully they approved it without much questioning. I never told HR what happened. What would I even say? There was no hard evidence, just a string of coincidences in that one moment I caught her red-handed. But deep down, I know what she was doing. It was methodical, quiet, almost surgical. She didn't want to destroy me. She wanted me to fall apart slowly, on my own. To this day, I haven't spoken to her again. She still works at the company, from what I hear. Moved up fast, too. Part of me wonders if she's done it to anyone else. But mostly, I just try not to think about it. I sleep better now, I lock my devices, I keep my professional and personal lives separate. I'm more guarded. And maybe that's the scariest part, that someone can get inside your life, not with violence or threats, but with little cuts so subtle you barely feel them, until you bleed. I was a junior at a small university in Oregon when this happened. It was the fall semester, and I had just moved off campus for the first time. I was juggling a part-time job at the student library and a full course load, so I couldn't afford to be picky when it came to housing. I found a listing on a student message board, decent price, close to campus, and the current tenant was looking for someone quiet and respectful. That's how I ended up sharing a 2-bedroom apartment with a guy named Jordan. Jordan was polite but distant, the kind of guy who never left dishes in the sink but also never made small talk. He had this overly neat room. No posters, no clutter, just a bed, desk, and a small bookshelf with nothing but law textbooks and a Bible. He worked evenings at some print shop downtown and mostly kept to himself. We'd exchange hellos in the kitchen, maybe the occasional comment about the weather, but that was about it. I didn't mind. I was tired all the time anyway, and he paid rent on time. That was enough for me. The first few weeks were uneventful. We had a routine. He came in late, I woke up early, and we rarely crossed paths. It wasn't until mid-October that something shifted. I woke up around 3 a.m. one night to this strange feeling, like someone was in the room. You know that sense you get when your body realizes something's off before your brain catches up? I opened my eyes, and there was Jordan, standing at the foot of my bed, just standing there, barefoot, holding something shiny in his right hand. It was a knife, a big kitchen knife, the one with the black handle we usually use to cut chicken or vegetables. He wasn't moving or speaking, just staring down at me like he was sleepwalking or something. I froze. My heart started pounding in my throat, and for a second, I honestly thought this was it. I didn't want to say anything too loud or sudden, so I whispered, "Jordan." And after what felt like forever, he blinked slowly and said, completely flat, "Oh, sorry man, I must have been sleepwalking." Then he turned and walked back to his room like it was nothing. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I just lay there, eyes wide open, trying to process what had just happened. Every time I blinked, I pictured that knife glinting in the dim light. I kept telling myself he was probably telling the truth. Some people really do sleepwalk. But the way he looked at me, it didn't feel like sleep. There was too much awareness in his eyes, like he knew exactly where he was. The next morning, I heard him in the kitchen making coffee, totally normal, like nothing had happened. When I came out, he actually smiled at me and asked if I wanted eggs. I didn't bring it up right away. I didn't even know how. What was I supposed to say? Hey, remember how you stood over me with a knife last night? I just mumbled that I had an early class and got out of there. For the next few days, I tried to convince myself it had been a one-time thing. I even Googled sleepwalking with objects. There were a few articles, some Reddit posts, people doing weird stuff in their sleep. But deep down, I wasn't convinced. And I started noticing little things that didn't sit right. Like how he always double-checked the locks 3, sometimes 4 times before bed. Or how I once caught him muttering something to himself in the living room while staring at the blank TV screen. One night, I found all the knives rearranged in the drawer, blades pointing outward, like someone had laid them there on purpose. And then there was the time I came home and my bedroom door was slightly open, even though I always shut and locked it before leaving. Nothing was missing, but I swear my pillows had been moved. I knew because I stacked them in a very specific way for my back. Eventually, I decided to confront him, not in an aggressive way, just carefully. I waited until we were both home on a Sunday afternoon, the only time our schedules overlapped. I brought it up casually, like I was joking. Dude, remember that night you were in my room with the knife? That freaked me out. He didn't laugh. He just stared at me for a few seconds, then said, Yeah, my mom said I used to do weird stuff in my sleep. Sometimes I'd scream or hit walls. It's just something I've always had. Then he paused and added, But don't worry, I've got it under control now. That last line didn't sound reassuring. It sounded rehearsed. That night I locked my bedroom door. I even slid my desk in front of it, just in case. I didn't sleep much. Every creak from the hallway felt louder, heavier. At one point around 2:30 a.m., I heard footsteps pacing back and forth right outside my door. They stopped. Then I heard a soft knock. 2 taps, nothing else. I didn't move, didn't answer. Just stayed under the covers with my phone clutched in my hand and 911 already typed out, thumb hovering over the call button. He never said anything. Just stood there, I think. I waited almost half an hour before the steps faded away. The next morning, I acted like nothing happened. I packed a bag, told Jordan I was spending a few nights at my girlfriend's place. Except I didn't have a girlfriend. I stayed in a cheap motel just off campus while I tried to figure out what the hell to do. I couldn't afford to break the lease, and technically Jordan hadn't done anything illegal. But I was constantly on edge and I knew something was off. I started asking around campus very carefully if anyone else knew him from classes or other apartments. That's when things really took a turn. One guy from my psychology lecture, Ben, pulled me aside after class and said, Wait, you live with Jordan? Dude, you need to be careful. He told me Jordan had been in the dorms 2 years before and had gotten kicked out after several incidents, one involving him screaming in the middle of the night and banging on someone's door with a broom handle. Another where someone claimed he was sitting outside their room for hours. I dug further and eventually found a girl who said she'd filed a complaint because she caught him standing outside her building every night for a week, just watching the windows. That was it for me. I went back to the apartment while Jordan was at work, packed up everything I could fit in my car, and left. I never even told him. I blocked his number, changed my email, and moved into a studio on the edge of town with paper-thin walls and a broken heater, but I slept better there than I had in weeks. A few months later, I saw a flyer on campus. Jordan was no longer enrolled due to personal reasons. That's all it said. I never found out what exactly was wrong with him. I just know that for weeks I slept across the hall from someone who stood over me with a knife and called it sleepwalking. I'm not really the type to share stuff online, but what happened to me a few years ago still gives me chills, and I guess writing it out is my way of processing it. Back in 2018, I had just moved to a mid-sized city in Oregon for my first real job out of college. I didn't know anyone there, and since rent was ridiculous, I turned to Craigslist to find a roommate situation fast. I was working long hours in graphic design, barely scraping by, so a cheap room in a shared house sounded like a win. That's how I met Jessica. Jessica was the one who posted the ad. She was around my age, maybe a year older, with this bubbly, overly warm energy that immediately made me let my guard down. When I went to see the place, she greeted me barefoot in pajama pants and offered me a popsicle, saying she'd just come back from a walk and loved the heat. It was February. That should have been my first red flag. But the rent was dirt cheap, and she said she just wanted a chill girl to share the space with. I moved in 3 days later with 2 suitcases and a foldable mattress. The first couple of weeks were fine, even though Jessica was a little off. She was talkative but evasive. She never really answered where she worked, just said she freelanced. I figured maybe she did stuff online. But she had random people over late at night, guys and girls, none of whom she introduced. I'd wake up around 2 or 3 a.m. and hear soft voices from the kitchen, laughing or whispering, sometimes pacing. Once, I found a guy I'd never seen before just sitting on the floor in the hallway eating cereal out of the box. He didn't even look up at me, just chewed like he lived there. I started locking my door at night. It wasn't even about feeling unsafe exactly, just this deep unease I couldn't shake. Jessica acted like everything was fine. She always smiled too wide, spoke a little too fast, and had this habit of avoiding eye contact at the weirdest moments. One night I asked her if everything was okay, just casually, and she looked at me like I'd caught her doing something. Then she laughed and said, "You're sweet. I'm just not good at normal life, you know." I didn't know what that meant, and I didn't ask again. Things got stranger one Saturday night around 11 p.m. I was watching something on my laptop when I heard the front door open and shut quietly. I didn't think much of it until I realized Jessica hadn't been home all day. Then, a few minutes later, my phone buzzed. It was a text from her. "Hey, can you come get me? I'm at the Speedway gas station on 12th. Please, I'm in trouble." Just like that. No punctuation except the period. My stomach twisted. I didn't know what kind of trouble she meant, but something about the message felt off. Not scared. Not urgent. Just scripted. I stared at my phone for a minute before grabbing my keys, but then I paused. Something was bugging me. Why would she call me instead of literally anyone else? Why not the police? Or even an Uber? And why didn't she call? Why text? I decided to sit tight and wait. I figured if she was really in danger, I'd hear something soon enough. That's when I realized my bedroom window had been cracked open a few inches. I never leave it open. I felt a jolt of panic, shut and locked it immediately, and turned off my lights. I sat in the dark, waiting, my phone in my hand. 10 minutes passed, then 15. No updates from Jessica, no new texts. I was about to message her when I heard it. Soft creaking on the floorboards just outside my door. Someone was inside the apartment. I held my breath, frozen, and listened. The sound moved down the hall, paused in front of my room, and then slowly retreated back toward the front door. I didn't dare move. After a while, I heard the door open again, then close, much louder this time. My heart was pounding. I waited a few more minutes before unlocking my door and peeking out. Nothing seemed out of place, except my coat was missing from the hook by the door, and so were my sneakers. I checked the locks, double-locked everything, and stayed up until sunrise with a kitchen knife next to me, trying to convince myself I hadn't just avoided something much worse. I kept replaying the timing, Jessica's message, the footsteps, the window. Something wasn't right, and I was starting to get seriously scared. The next morning, I got up early and drove past the Speedway gas station she had mentioned. It was just a few blocks from our place. I parked across the street and watched for a few minutes. Nothing. No Jessica. I texted her again asking if she was okay. No reply. When I got back home around 8 a.m., she was in the kitchen like nothing had happened, wearing my coat and eating cereal like a sitcom character. She looked up and smiled like we hadn't skipped a beat. I asked her what happened last night, and she just blinked and said, "What do you mean?" I didn't even know how to respond. I was tired, freaked out, and something in her expression made my skin crawl, like she was waiting to see what I knew before she spoke. I went back to my room and started packing. I didn't have a plan, just knew I had to get out of there. That's when I found my laptop missing, and some cash I kept hidden in a mug in my closet. Gone. That's when it all clicked. She'd tried to lure me out of the house. Someone else had been inside while I waited in the dark, and she wasn't even trying to hide it. That smile at the kitchen table. It was smug. She knew I knew. I ended up crashing with a coworker for a few weeks until I found another place. I filed a police report, but honestly, I didn't expect much. Craigslist deals go bad all the time, and Jessica, if that was even her real name, disappeared a few days later. She left the apartment trashed, didn't pay the last month's rent, and vanished. The landlord said she'd used a fake reference on the lease. I never got my stuff back, but in the end, I was just relieved nothing worse had happened. The scariest part, I still don't know how many people were in that apartment with her that night. It took me a while to stop checking over my shoulder. For months, I couldn't sleep without something wedged against the door. I kept trying to rationalize it, tell myself maybe I overreacted. Maybe it was just petty theft, but deep down I know it could have gone way worse. If I had left the house that night even for 5 minutes, who knows what I would have come back to, or if I would have come back at all. So yeah, be careful with Craigslist, and trust your gut, even when the red flags are dressed in pajama pants and a popsicle smile. I was 19 when it happened, right at the start of my sophomore year at a college in upstate New York. I'd just moved into a small off-campus apartment with a guy named Kyle. We'd been matched through one of those roommate finder apps. Nothing sketchy, just two students trying to save money. At first, Kyle seemed pretty normal. A little quiet, maybe, but polite and clean. We didn't hang out much, but we got along fine. He was studying graphic design and had a weird obsession with rearranging furniture. Like every 3 days, the desk or bed would be in a totally new position. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured it was just his way of coping with stress or boredom. Then out of nowhere, after just 2 weeks of living together, Kyle packed up and left. No warning. I came home from class one afternoon, and his side of the room was completely empty. No note, no text, no explanation. The only thing he left behind was his key on the kitchen counter. I tried reaching out a couple times just to make sure he was okay, but he never responded. Eventually, I assumed he dropped out or transferred, and life moved on. I got a new roommate a month later, but he was rarely around, and I mostly had the place to myself. It felt weird at first, but also kind of nice. It had been almost 5 months since Kyle left when the night everything changed happened. It was early December, cold, quiet, with snow falling outside. I'd gone to bed around 1 a.m. after finishing a paper. I remember that night clearly because I'd fallen asleep with headphones in, playing a white noise app to drown out the wind. Sometime in the middle of the night, though, I woke up with this intense sense that something was off, like someone was in the room. I took out my headphones, and the room was dead silent, except for the slow creaking of wood. At first, I thought it was just the building settling from the cold, but then I opened my eyes and froze. Standing in the middle of the room was Kyle, same lanky frame, but thinner, paler, and wearing an oversized army green jacket that looked like it hadn't been washed in months. His hair was greasy, hanging over his eyes, and he had dark smudges under them, like he hadn't slept in days. But the worst part wasn't how he looked. It was what he was doing. He was moving the furniture, my bed, my desk, even the small rug I had near the closet. Carefully, slowly, like he was setting up a space for himself, like he still lived there. And he didn't say a word, not when I sat up, Not when I called his name. He just kept rearranging the room like I wasn't even there. I didn't know what to do. I just sat there frozen in bed watching him. My phone was on the nightstand, but it felt like any sudden move would break whatever thin thread was keeping him from snapping. Eventually, I managed to ask, "Kyle, what are you doing?" His hands paused midair, holding the edge of my desk. He slowly turned to look at me, and his eyes were so hollow it felt like I was staring at someone who had completely left himself behind. Then he said, almost cheerfully, "Just fixing it. You moved everything." His voice had this unsettling calmness, like he wasn't angry, just confused, like I was the one who had done something wrong. I told him this wasn't his room anymore, that he had left months ago, that I had a new roommate now and he couldn't just come in. But Kyle barely blinked. He kept muttering about how he needed the space back the way it was, and that someone messed it up while he was gone. Then he walked into the closet, opened it, and just stood there staring inside for what felt like a full minute. I was about to reach for my phone when he turned around and asked, completely serious, "Where are my sketchbooks?" I told him I didn't have them, that he must have taken them when he moved out. He didn't respond. He just walked to the corner of the room and sat on the floor, hugging his knees, like a child who'd just been told his toys were gone. At that point, I got out of bed, slowly, and grabbed my phone. I stepped into the hallway, closed the door behind me, and called campus security. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely type in the number. While I waited, I kept listening through the door. I couldn't hear him moving anymore, just a low humming sound like he was singing to himself. It wasn't any song I recognized, just this off-key droning that sent chills down my spine. When the security guys finally showed up, they knocked, then entered with me right behind them. But Kyle wasn't sitting in the corner anymore. He was lying in my bed, covers pulled up neatly like he'd tucked himself in, eyes wide open, staring straight at the ceiling. He didn't speak when they asked him his name, didn't react at all when they gently pulled back the blanket, just kept humming that awful tune, softer now, like it was just for himself. When they finally got him up, he went with them quietly. No struggle, no yelling, just this blank look on his face like nothing around him felt real anymore. One of the guards later told me he'd found a folded piece of paper under the pillow. It was a rough pencil sketch of our old room layout, exactly how Kyle had been trying to recreate it. In the corner, written over and over again, was the phrase, "This is where I belong." After that night, I couldn't sleep in that room anymore. I ended up crashing on a friend's couch for the rest of the semester. The university helped me break my lease early, and my new roommate moved out too. He said the whole thing creeped him out too much. Can't really blame him. I kept thinking about the way Kyle looked at me like I was the one who didn't belong, like I was living in his room, in his reality, and he was just reclaiming it. The thing is, Kyle never contacted me after that. Not a text, not a call, nothing. It was like he just evaporated into the system after campus security took him. A few months later, I ran into one of the RAs who had known Kyle from his freshman year. I asked if anyone knew where he'd ended up. She told me, in a low voice, that he'd been placed in some kind of long-term psychiatric care facility upstate. Apparently, he'd dropped out quietly the first time because he was dealing with something serious, paranoia, disassociation, maybe even early schizophrenia. I don't know for sure. What haunts me, though, is that nobody thought to check in on him after he left. He just fell off the radar until he walked back into my life like nothing had changed. Sometimes, late at night, I still wake up to the sound of wood creaking. I know it's just my brain playing tricks, but for a split second, I always expect to see Kyle standing there again, quietly rearranging furniture. I changed apartments, cities, even transferred to a different school the following year. But that feeling of someone silently rewriting your space, your reality, because they believe it belongs to them, never really left. There's something terrifying about how calm he was. He wasn't violent. He wasn't loud. He just was present, unshakable, like a shadow that believed it had the right to stand in your place. I still keep that sketch they found under my pillow. Don't ask me why. I guess part of me wants proof that it all really happened. It's tucked away in a box with some old textbooks and notes I never finished. On bad nights, I take it out and look at the shaky lines, the obsessive details. It reminds me that people can carry entire worlds in their heads, worlds that make perfect sense to them, but collide violently with ours. Kyle never hurt me, not physically, but he shattered my sense of safety in a way I didn't know was possible. And to this day, I sleep with my door locked. Always. I'm Anna, 29 years old, and this happened about 2 years ago when I was living in Portland, Oregon. I had just gotten promoted at the digital marketing firm I worked for, and everything seemed to be going well. I was living in a modest 2-bedroom apartment not far from downtown. Rent wasn't cheap, so I posted on a company board that I was looking for a roommate to split costs. That's how I met Laura. She worked in a different department, seemed quiet and polite, and said she needed a place fast after a bad breakup. She looked a little fragile, like life had hit her hard, and I guess I felt bad for her. I told her she could move in the next day. At first, living with Laura was easy. She kept to herself, cleaned up after using the kitchen, and always smiled that sort of half smile like she was trying not to cry. After a few weeks, she told me she was struggling financially and asked to borrow $80 until payday. I didn't think much of it. I've been there before too. But then it happened again and again. Sometimes $50, sometimes $120. Always followed by the same story. Late paycheck, unexpected bill, something with her bank. She always promised to pay me back, but the money never came. The weird thing was, she didn't seem panicked about it. She just said it so casually. After a while, I started noticing inconsistencies. She told me she worked late nights managing email campaigns, but I'd see her come home in the afternoon on weekdays. Once, she said she had to go to a weekend training in Seattle, but I caught her in our laundry room folding clothes the very next day. I asked about it and she laughed, said her plans got canceled. I wanted to believe her, but it started to feel off. She'd come home with expensive makeup and new shoes, but still said she couldn't pay her half of the internet bill. One night I half joked, "You're not secretly rich and just hustling me, right?" She smiled and said, "Wouldn't that be a twist?" But there was something in the way she said it that didn't sit right with me. Things escalated when I accidentally received a letter addressed to someone named Natalie Gray, care of our apartment. It was from a credit card company, a final notice. I showed it to Laura, assuming it was just an old tenant's mail. She got weirdly defensive. She snatched the envelope from my hand and snapped, "That's none of your business." Then she disappeared into her room and didn't come out for the rest of the night. I stood there in the hallway holding a basket of laundry, and my gut twisted in a way I couldn't explain. Something was wrong. I just didn't know how wrong yet. A few nights later, I couldn't sleep. It was around 1 a.m. Then I was sitting at the kitchen table with my laptop, trying to finish a report. Laura had gone out earlier and wasn't back yet. Out of pure curiosity, or maybe gut instinct, I searched Natalie Gray Portland just to see what came up. At first, there was nothing unusual, but then I stumbled on an old forum thread warning about a woman who scammed roommates. Different cities, different names, but the descriptions matched. Dark blonde hair, soft voice, nervous laugh, always needing a little help until payday. One of the posters mentioned a woman named Natalie who had scammed them in Denver under the name Laura Green. My heart sank. That was my Laura's full name. I reread the thread 3 times, hands trembling. The next day I waited until Laura left for work, if that's even where she was going, and checked her room. I know how bad that sounds, but I wasn't trying to invade her privacy. I was trying to protect myself. The door was unlocked. Inside, everything was oddly neat, almost like a hotel room that no one really lived in. There were only a few clothes, some random makeup, and a laptop on the desk. No photos, no personal items. But in the bottom drawer of her dresser, I found a folder, just a regular manila folder, unmarked. Inside were printed documents, some copies of IDs, one of which had Natalie Gray on it. There were also notes with different addresses, dates, and names I didn't recognize. And the worst part? A printed email conversation between Laura and someone named Jay. They were talking about me. The messages were short, but I'll never forget one of them. It said, "This one's trusting. Already got $500. I'll see how much longer I can stay." I felt like the floor dropped beneath me. I sat there for what felt like hours, trying to understand what I had gotten myself into. This wasn't just someone struggling financially. This was someone with a system, a method. And I was next in a string of victims who probably never saw it coming. My mouth was dry, my heart was racing, and my hands were ice cold. All I could think was, I need to get out. But part of me didn't want to leave without confronting her. I don't know why. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was fear wrapped in defiance. That night, when she came home, I pretended like everything was normal. I made tea, asked her about her day, even offered her the last cookie we had. She was her usual self, charming, tired, sweet. But now, every word she said felt like a lie, and every smile looked like a mask. I barely slept that night. Every time I heard a creak, I flinched. I locked my bedroom door and pushed my dresser in front of it, just in case. And I started planning exactly how I'd get her out of my life, for good. The next morning, I called out sick from work and headed straight to the leasing office. I explained everything to the property manager, including the documents I found and my suspicions about her identity. They looked stunned but surprisingly not shocked. Turns out, Laura, or Natalie, or whatever her name was, wasn't even on the lease. I had added her as a sublet informally, thinking I was being helpful. They told me if she wasn't on the lease, I had the right to ask her to leave immediately. That gave me the courage I needed. I printed a formal notice, taped it to her door, and texted her that she had 48 hours to pack her things and go. No arguments, no explanations. She didn't respond for almost a full day. Then around midnight, I heard her come in. I stayed in my room, lights off, heart pounding. She knocked once on my door but didn't say anything. Just stood there. I could see her shadow under the door, motionless. I didn't breathe. After what felt like forever, I heard her slowly walk away. In the morning, she was gone. Her room was empty, completely stripped down to the mattress. The folder was gone, the laptop too. She left no note, no trace, no closure. Just that eerie silence and a deep, unsettling sense that I had let a stranger live right next to me. Over the next few weeks, I kept looking over my shoulder. I changed the locks, warned everyone at work, and reported her to the police. I even posted in that same forum where I first saw her name, hoping someone else might avoid what I went through. But part of me always wondered what would have happened if I hadn't found those documents. Would she have taken more money? Stolen my identity? Hurt me? I'll never know. But I do know that trusting someone just because they seem broken doesn't mean they're harmless. Sometimes the most convincing lies come wrapped in soft voices and kind eyes. It's been 2 years, and I still double-check every roommate I consider. I run background checks now. I learned the hard way that being cautious isn't being paranoid. It's being safe. I don't think I'll ever fully understand who Laura really was or how many people she fooled before me. But I'm glad I got out before she took more than just my money. She almost took my peace of mind. And in some ways, maybe she still did. Because even now, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night thinking I heard footsteps outside my bedroom door. And for a split second, I wonder if she ever really left. I'm Ethan, and this happened about 8 months ago during my second year of college in Ohio. I just moved off campus to a small 2-bedroom rental with my roommate Ben. We weren't best friends, but we got along fine. We met in a psychology class the year before and bonded over late-night study sessions and a shared obsession with takeout Chinese. The house was a simple 1-story place with creaky floors, weak Wi-Fi, and a weirdly narrow hallway, but it felt like a huge upgrade from the dorms. For the first couple of weeks, everything was calm. Classes were steady, my sleep was finally normalizing, and the house felt like mine. But then small things started to feel off. The first time, I chalked it up to being absent-minded. I came back from class and noticed the back door was cracked open. I assumed I hadn't shut it properly. But it kept happening. A few days later, the bathroom light was on when I came home, even though I knew I hadn't used it that morning. I started triple-checking things before leaving. Doors locked, lights off, everything in place. Still, I'd come back to something different. A chair pulled slightly out from the kitchen table. The hallway closet opened just a crack. My hoodie moved from the hook by the front door to the floor. I tried talking to Ben about it once. He was usually laid back, kind of sarcastic in that nothing phases me way, so I didn't expect much. When I mentioned the door being open again, he laughed and said, "Maybe we've got a ghost with bad hygiene." I laughed too, trying to play it cool. But deep down, I was getting really uncomfortable. He didn't offer any help, didn't even ask questions, just shrugged it off and went back to texting. The weirdest part? He was never home when I noticed the strange stuff. Not once. Always at class or out with his girlfriend, Dana. Then things started escalating. One night I woke up around 3:30 a.m. because I swore I heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, soft steps on those creaky damn floors. My door was shut, and I lay there frozen, barely breathing, waiting to hear them again. Nothing. I told myself it was just Ben going to the bathroom, but in the morning I asked and he said he'd stayed over at Dana's that night. I laughed it off like it was no big deal, but I didn't sleep right for days. That same week I came home to find the window in my bedroom slightly open, with the screen pushed outward, like someone had tried to climb out or in. I hadn't opened it in over a week. That's when the fear really started sinking in. I wasn't just spooked anymore, I was scared. I finally decided to buy a cheap indoor security camera online, the kind you plug into the wall and control through an app. I set it up on the bookshelf in the living room, angled to catch the hallway and front door. I didn't tell Ben about it. I wasn't even thinking he was involved. I honestly thought someone might have been sneaking into the house. Maybe a neighbor with a key, or someone who used to live there. My mind was spiraling with theories. I couldn't focus on anything else. Every night before bed, I checked every lock twice and made sure the windows were shut tight. Still, I kept waking up with that sick feeling that something wasn't right. The footage didn't show much at first, just normal stuff. Me walking back and forth, Ben coming and going, the lights flicking on and off when expected. But then, one morning, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. It was from the night before, around 2:14 a.m. The camera picked up a faint movement in the hallway, just outside my bedroom door. A figure, tall, hoodie on, just standing there. The face wasn't clear, but the way he stood, so still facing my door, it made my skin crawl. I watched it over and over, trying to convince myself it was just Ben checking on something. But why wouldn't he knock? Why wouldn't he say anything? And why was he watching me sleep? That night, I confronted him. I waited until we were both home and I just asked him directly, "Hey, were you in the hallway last night around 2 a.m.? His reaction was immediate. Wide eyes, then a confused laugh. "What? No, dude, I wasn't even here. I was at Dana's, remember?" He pulled out his phone and showed me a blurry pic of them watching some horror movie. It had a timestamp, but that didn't prove where he was at 2 a.m. He must have noticed how freaked out I looked, because he actually seemed concerned for once. "You okay, man? You're not sleeping well, huh?" I nodded, but didn't say much. I didn't tell him about the camera. Something inside me said not to. I didn't trust him. Not anymore. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the house changed completely. Ben got quiet. Too quiet. He used to hum while brushing his teeth or leave the TV on too loud in the living room. But suddenly, he moved like a shadow. Silent, careful, watching. I started noticing things that hadn't been there before. My shampoo replaced with a different brand. My toothbrush moved slightly. Even one of my textbooks had pages dog-eared in chapters I hadn't reached yet. None of this made sense. Either I was losing it completely, or someone was actively messing with me. And the worst part? I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even in my own room, especially in my own room. I finally hit my breaking point on a Saturday night. I'd gone out to grab dinner and left the house around 7 p.m., making sure, again, that every door and window was locked. When I got back just after 9, the front door was wide open, not cracked, not unlocked. Wide open. I stood there for a good minute just staring at it. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I called out Ben's name, but there was no answer. I grabbed the heaviest thing I could find, a metal floor lamp, and slowly walked inside. Every room was empty. Nothing seemed stolen, but something was different. My bedroom light was on, and I never leave it on. That's when I remembered the camera. I ran to the app, heart racing, hands shaking. I pulled up the footage and rewound to right after I left. The video started playing, and there he was, Ben, walking around the living room like he was looking for something, then heading into my room. 10 minutes later, he came out, put on a hoodie, and this part made my blood run cold. He crouched in the hallway right outside my bedroom door, just like the figure in that earlier footage. Then he walked calmly to the front door and left it wide open. On purpose. Like he wanted me to think someone broke in. It wasn't some random intruder. It was him. It had been him all along. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't even move. I sat in my locked room with a chair propped against the doorknob, just waiting for morning. As soon as the sun came up, I packed a bag and left. I stayed at a friend's place across town and sent Ben a text saying I knew what he was doing and that I'd be out for good by the end of the week. He didn't even respond. A few days later, while I was grabbing the rest of my stuff, Dana showed up at the house, holding a key. She looked confused when she saw me. "I thought you already moved out," she said. That's when it all clicked. He was trying to scare me into leaving, so she could move in. I still don't understand how he justified it. Like, how do you go from being someone's roommate to plotting psychological warfare just to squeeze your girlfriend into a lease? I never confronted him face to face. I didn't want to give him that satisfaction. I just left. Found a studio apartment closer to campus with a deadbolt and no roommates. I still think about those weeks sometimes. The fear, the confusion, the hallway footsteps at night. But what gets me most is how close I was to believing I was losing my mind, when all along, it was just someone I trusted playing a cruel, manipulative game. I'm okay now, but I double-check my locks every single night. I'm Megan, and this happened about 2 years ago, right after I moved to Portland for a new job. I was 26, recently out of a long-term relationship, and trying to rebuild some stability in my life. When I got the offer at a mid-sized marketing agency, I saw it as a fresh start. I didn't know many people in the city, so when a coworker, Natalie, mentioned she was looking for a roommate to share her 2-bedroom apartment, I thought it was perfect. She seemed quiet and polite, someone who kept to herself and wouldn't bring chaos into my life. That was all I wanted. Peace. At first, everything was smooth. Natalie was respectful, paid her share of the rent on time, and didn't throw parties or bring strangers home. She worked in a different department at the agency, so we didn't interact much at work either, which, honestly, I liked. We'd make small talk in the kitchen, things like weather, her cat, or what series she was watching. She had this soft-spoken voice and avoided eye contact, like someone who'd been through something or just wasn't very social. I didn't question it. In fact, I kind of admired how quiet and self-contained she was. I wasn't prepared for how quickly that image would start to crack. The first weird thing I noticed was my red hoodie. It was one of those oversized, worn-in sweatshirts you never really wear out, but love too much to get rid of. I couldn't find it for a couple of days and just assumed I left it at the gym, or maybe at my ex's place the last time I went to get the rest of my stuff. But then it turned up, folded, in the back of my closet, on top of a box I hadn't touched since moving in. I figured maybe I misplaced it in the move, even though I was sure it hadn't been there before. I brushed it off. But then it happened again, with a necklace my mom gave me. Then a pair of earrings. My things weren't just vanishing and reappearing, they were being moved, and always turning up in oddly perfect places, like someone had carefully chosen where to put them. That's when this uncomfortable feeling started to grow in my stomach. I began second-guessing myself constantly. Had I left those shoes under the bed or in the hallway? Did I forget I wore that ring to work? I wasn't sleeping well either. I'd lie in bed, replaying the day in my head, trying to track where I'd seen things last. Natalie always seemed the same, quiet, polite, a little withdrawn. But sometimes I'd catch her glancing at me when she thought I wasn't looking. And not just glancing, watching. I'd walk into the kitchen and her eyes would flick away like she'd been staring. Still, I didn't want to believe anything was really wrong. I told myself I was paranoid. But something inside me knew. I just wasn't ready to face it yet. I finally hit a breaking point when I came home early from work one Friday. I wasn't supposed to be off until 6, but I had a migraine and left around lunchtime. I didn't text Natalie because I figured she'd still be at work. But when I opened the front door, I heard movement, soft footsteps coming from my room. My heart dropped. I froze in the hallway, holding my breath. A few seconds later, Natalie stepped out of my bedroom, holding my hairbrush. She looked just as surprised to see me as I was to see her. She stammered something about thinking it was hers, apologized, and rushed back to her room. I didn't say anything. I couldn't even process it. I just stood there gripping my bag like it would somehow protect me from what I was starting to suspect. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about her standing in my room, in my space, with something so personal in her hands. I started replaying all the small moments that hadn't made sense. The misplaced things, the folded hoodie, how clean my desk looked when I knew I had left it messy. It wasn't just that she was moving my stuff, she was studying it, touching it, maybe even using it. The next morning, I bought a cheap motion-activated camera online and set it up on my bookshelf, aimed discreetly at the doorway and most of the room. I told myself it was just to ease my mind. But deep down, I was preparing myself for whatever truth it might reveal. It took less than a week. I went out to dinner with a friend from work and left the camera running. When I got home, I rushed into my room, heart pounding, and opened the app on my phone. What I saw made me feel physically sick. Natalie had entered my room just 15 minutes after I left. She didn't sneak or look guilty. She walked in slowly, methodically, like she'd done it 100 times. She opened my drawers, held up my clothes to her body, even smelled a shirt like it was something familiar and comforting. And then, God, I watched her put on my necklace, the one from my mom. She stood in front of my mirror, tilting her head, smiling softly at her reflection. It didn't look like a joke or a dare, it looked like ritual. I couldn't stop shaking. I sat on the floor for what felt like hours, just staring at the screen. I felt violated in a way I can't even explain. It wasn't just my space or my stuff, it was my sense of self. She had been pretending to be this shy, quiet roommate, when in reality she'd been studying me, mimicking me, wearing pieces of my life like a costume. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to confront her right then, scream and throw her out. But another part, the bigger part, was terrified. Because if she was capable of this, what else was going on in her head? I spent the next day pretending everything was normal. I smiled when I passed her in the kitchen. I made coffee like usual. I even asked her how her day at work had been. She barely answered, just gave a soft, "Fine," and disappeared into her room. I couldn't tell if she suspected anything. Maybe she sensed a shift in my tone. Maybe she didn't care. That night, I packed a bag and left it in the trunk of my car, just in case. I forwarded the footage to my mom and one of my close friends with a message that said, "If anything happens, show this to the police." I still didn't know if I was overreacting, but I wasn't willing to take the risk anymore. On Sunday, I arranged to meet with my landlord under the excuse of asking about renewing the lease. When I got there, I showed him the footage. I didn't know what kind of reaction to expect, disbelief, dismissal, but as soon as he saw the video, his face went pale. He said I could break the lease immediately, no penalty. I was relieved, but part of me felt sick that this was even real. I had to go back and get the rest of my stuff though. So I waited until Natalie was out on Monday, then brought 2 friends with me. We packed everything in under an hour. I never saw her again. She didn't text, didn't ask what happened, just vanished from my life like she had never been there. It's been 2 years and I still can't wear that necklace. I keep it in a box in my closet, buried under scarves. It's not that I think she did something to it. It's just that every time I see it, I remember her face in the mirror, tilting her head, trying to become me. I think that's what still gets under my skin the most. Not that she invaded my space, but that she didn't see me as a person, just a collection of things she wanted to try on. Sometimes I wonder if she's done this before, or if she's doing it again with someone new. I'll never know. What I do know is this: if something feels wrong, pay attention. I ignored every red flag because I didn't want to seem paranoid. I wanted to believe she was just shy, that I was just forgetful. But the truth was always there, sitting quietly across the table, watching me a little too closely. I was in my second year of grad school when this happened, back in the fall of 2022. I was studying psychology at the University of Oregon, which meant long hours, a mountain of reading, and almost no money. Like most broke students, I found a cheap 2-bedroom apartment about 15 minutes off campus. That's where I met Alex. He was already living there and looking for a roommate to split the rent. At first glance, he seemed like a solid guy, very extroverted, the kind who makes friends instantly. We grabbed coffee before I moved in, talked music and hiking, and I thought, yeah, this'll work. The first few weeks were fine. Alex was a bit of a night owl, but so was I. We'd run into each other in the kitchen at 2 a.m. sometimes, joking about how grad school had turned our brains to soup. He worked part-time at a bookstore downtown and was always talking about some obscure sci-fi novel or weird conspiracy podcast he was into. I didn't think much of it. Lots of people have their quirks. But I started noticing things that felt off. Not scary at first, just strange. It began with his sleep, or rather, the lack of it. I'd come back from a night class at 10 p.m. and find him pacing in the living room. Then I'd get up at 7 a.m. for class, and he'd still be there, eyes wide, muttering to himself. He'd go 2, sometimes 3 days without sleeping. I gently brought it up once, half joking, like, "Dude, you ever sleep?" He laughed, but it was this dry, cracked sound, and he said something like, "Can't, too many eyes out there." I thought it was just some stoner nonsense or maybe burnout. I wish it had stayed at that. Then came the mood swings. One day he'd offer to make breakfast for both of us, playing indie rock on his phone like everything was cool. The next, he'd slam his bedroom door so hard the wall shook. He stopped going to work, stopped showering, started scribbling notes on Post-its and sticking them all over the fridge. Weird diagrams, numbers, sometimes just phrases like, "Watch the walls," or "It's in the wires." One night he knocked on my door just to ask if I'd been talking about him to the people upstairs. I told him no, of course not, but the way he stared at me like he was trying to peel open my skull with his eyes. That's when I started locking my bedroom door at night. It got worse fast. I started avoiding the apartment as much as I could, spending extra hours at the library, taking the long way home just to clear my head. But I still had to sleep there, and every night became this slow, creeping dread. I'd lie in bed, listening to him move around. Sometimes he'd pace back and forth for hours, muttering things I couldn't make out. Once, I swear I heard him whispering my name. Not yelling it, whispering, repeating it over and over again like some kind of prayer. I didn't sleep much after that. About a week later, I came home late after a study group. The apartment was completely dark. I thought maybe he'd finally crashed, finally sleeping. I walked into the kitchen to grab a drink. and I stopped cold. The fridge was covered top to bottom in more Post-its, hundreds of them. But now they weren't random words or drawings. They were all messages directed at me. James knows. James is listening. He's not who he says he is. I felt like someone had reached inside my chest and crushed my lungs. I backed out and went straight to my room, locked the door, and didn't come out until morning. After that, I started thinking seriously about moving out. I even talked to my advisor about it, and she offered to connect me with campus housing, but it would take a few weeks. I figured I could handle it for just a bit longer, as long as I kept my door locked. Then one night, around 3 a.m., I woke up to this scratching sound. It wasn't loud, but it was steady. Scratch, scratch, scratch. I turned on my bedside lamp and froze. The sound was coming from the hallway right outside my room. I waited. Then I heard it, Alex's voice. Low, shaky, whispering through the door. "I know what you're doing in there. You think I can't see?" I didn't respond. I didn't move. I just sat there holding my breath for what felt like forever. Eventually, the scratching stopped. His footsteps retreated down the hall and I heard his door creak shut. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I pretended everything was fine, said good morning, even made coffee like nothing had happened. He stared at me the whole time, eyes bloodshot, jittery, smiling just a little too wide. That was the moment I realized he truly believed something was after him. Not just paranoia. It was like he was at war with an invisible enemy, and somehow I'd become part of it. The breaking point came a few nights later. I was brushing my teeth, getting ready to crash early, when I heard a crash from the living room, like something heavy had been thrown against the wall. I opened my door just a crack and peeked out. Alex was standing there, barefoot, shirtless, holding a kitchen knife. His face was slick with sweat, and his pupils looked huge, like black marbles. He didn't even see me. He was yelling at the air, shouting about people spying on him, how they were crawling through the vents and planting things in his food. Then he turned toward the hallway, toward me. I slammed the door shut and locked it just as he charged. He started banging on it with his fists, screaming that I was one of them, that I'd led them in. I backed into the far corner of the room, grabbed my phone with shaking hands, and dialed 911. The dispatcher could barely hear me over the noise. Alex kept pounding the door, kicking it, saying over and over again, "You betrayed me, you betrayed me, you betrayed me." It was like something had snapped inside him, and all that pressure, all that madness had finally exploded. The police showed up fast. Thank God. I heard the front door bust open, heard the officers shouting, heard Alex screaming something about wires in his teeth and messages in the tap water. They got him on the ground and cuffed him, but he was still yelling as they dragged him out. After that night, I never saw him again. One of the officers told me quietly, while I was giving my statement, that Alex had a history of severe mental illness and had gone off his meds months ago. I didn't even know he'd been prescribed anything. I moved out 2 days later, couldn't stay. Even empty, the place felt poisoned. I still have dreams sometimes. Alex banging on the door, whispering my name. I keep the door to my bedroom locked every night, even now, even though I live alone. I never really figured out what pushed him over the edge, or if I missed something I should have seen. But I do know this. Paranoia isn't just a feeling. Sometimes it's a whole world someone builds, and if you're close enough, they might just drag you into it.